The corridor of the Iron Gate smelled like recycled air and old fear, and Sergeant Vera had long since stopped noticing either. She stood at the intersection of Corridor 7 Alpha and the maintenance crawlspace that the crew called the Throat, running her thumb along the safety of her PDW the way she'd done 11 times before. Each time a ship she was standing inside had become a killing floor, each time the Solari had arrived like bad weather made of flesh and alloy and rage. The Iron Gate was a mid-tonnage destroyer, narrow-corridored and dense with pipes and junction boxes, which was exactly the kind of ship breach teams were built to defend. Wide corridored cruisers were slaughterhouses. The narrow ones gave defenders angles. Gave them choke points. Gave them the one thing that even the odds against creatures 300% more massive than a human soldier, the inability to be surrounded. She did one last check of her team. Korvek was seated against the bulkhead to her left, running a borecloth through the barrel of his rotary carbine with the focused calm of a man who had accepted death so completely that preparedness was the only religion he had left. He was the oldest of them, 41, which in breach team years was geologic, and he had a habit of humming something tuneless and slow when they were waiting, which he was doing now. Nobody had ever asked him to stop. It was, somehow, a comfort. Dresh and Sable were together, as they always were before an event, their shoulders touching, not speaking. Dresh was the team's breacher, built low and wide, with forearms like load-bearing columns and a hydraulic ram slung across his back that could open any door on any ship in the fleet. Sable was his opposite in almost every way, lean and still, a former naval intelligence operative who had requested breach team assignment after her third surgical team was boarded and killed around her, and who had decided that if she was going to be in the corridors when the Solari came, she was going to be the kind of person who was ready for it. She carried a scattergun and a blade that she kept sharp enough to reflect her own face back at her, which she checked now, which she always checked now. Priest and Wren were at the far end of the intersection, Priest peering around the corner with a mirror on a stick that he'd fabricated himself from spare parts, Wren crouched below him running her fingers along the detonators on her belt in sequence, left to right, the way she did when she was nervous, which was always, which did not diminish her effectiveness in any observable way. Wren was 24 and had been with Breach 7 for 8 months, which made her the newest member by 2 years, which made her a veteran by any external standard. She had a gift for demolitions that Vera had never quite been able to explain, an intuition about load-bearing structures and blast radii that seemed almost architectural, a talent for making small explosions do disproportionate work. And then there was Tess. Tess stood a little apart from the others, the way he always did, not out of loneliness but out of necessity. He was half Solari on his father's side, the alien physiology expressing itself in the slightly wrong proportions, the too wide jaw, the subdermal bioluminescence that ran along his neck and collarbones in patterns that pulsed faintly blue-green in low light, patterns that Vera had learned, over 2 years and 11 events, to read like a weather report. When the patterns were slow and regular, nothing was coming. When they quickened, spiked, began to bloom outward from his sternum like something underneath his skin was pressing against it, that meant 2 seconds. 2 seconds before a Solari teleportation completed, Tess's biology rang like a struck bell, the sympathetic resonance of Solari quantum displacement technology activating something ancestral and involuntary in his hybrid nervous system, and he would say the word, always the same word, always flat and controlled and immediate. Incoming. 2 seconds. In a corridor fight against creatures that averaged 2.4 meters tall and wore armor plating grown from their own calcified biology, 2 seconds was the difference between a prepared firing line and a slaughter. Tess had saved their lives. Vera had once tried to count the number of times specifically attributable to his warning, and had stopped at 30 because the number felt wrong to say out loud, felt like the kind of number that became a story, and stories were for after. She looked at him now. His patterns were slow. Regular. Nothing yet. Command, this is Breach 7, she said into her radio. We're staged at 7 Alpha. Status. The response came back through static and the particular tight-throated quality of a comms officer trying to sound calm. Breach 7, this is Iron Gate Command. Fleet-wide alert has been upgraded to Solari imminent. 30 vessels in the battle group are showing quantum displacement field readings. Sergeant, we're looking at a coordinated action. Vera processed this. How coordinated? A pause. Longer than she liked. Fleet Command is calling it the largest simultaneous boarding operation in the war. All 30 ships are showing field readings in excess of anything previously recorded. Iron Gate's readings are the highest in the group. Korvek had stopped humming. How high? Vera asked. Another pause. Sergeant, our quantum displacement sensors are reading enough field energy for over 300 individual insertions. The number settled over the team like something physical. Dresh and Sable stopped touching shoulders. Priest pulled his mirror back from the corner. Ren's fingers stopped moving on her detonators. 300. The most soldiers ever teleported onto a single ship in any previous boarding action had been 64, onto the Caraway, 9 months ago. The Caraway had had 3 breach teams. All 3 were dead within 40 minutes. The ship was still in Solari hands. Vera looked at her 6 people. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Just the one word, because it was the only word that was true, not 'we'll be fine', not 'we can handle this', just the acknowledgement that the situation existed and they were in it and they were going to fight through it because that was what they did, and every member of Breach Team 7 understood the economy of that single syllable completely. Spread to secondary positions," she said. "We can't hold one corridor against 300. We move. We make them pay for every meter. Korvek, you're with me. Dresh, take Sable and Ren to the junction at 6 Bravo. Set Ren's first line of charges at the approach to the armory. Priest, take Tess and stage at the fire door between decks 3 and 4. If they push through the upper corridors, we need to be able to seal the vertical access." Everyone moved. No questions. No hesitation. Tess passed close to her as he moved toward Priest, and she caught his arm for half a second. Just the contact, just a brief acknowledgement, and he looked at her with his 2 wide pale eyes and the bioluminescence along his neck slow and regular and steady, and he said, very quietly, "I'll hear them coming." "I know you will," she said. She let him go. The first insertion happened at 0341 ship time, and Tess was not in the corridor when it did. He was 40 meters away with Priest at the fire door, and his warning came through the radio 2 seconds before impact, "Incoming, 7 Alpha, multiple," and then the world became noise. Vera and Korvek were already moving, flat against opposite walls, weapons up, Korvek's rotary carbine spinning to speed, and the Solari materialized mid-corridor in a cascade of displaced atmosphere, the sharp crack of air rushing in to fill suddenly occupied space, the smell like ozone and something organic underneath it, and there were 5 of them, massive and terrible in their calcified plate, their weapon limbs already raised, their compound eyes sweeping the corridor in the first confused fraction of a second of spatial reorientation that was the only vulnerability teleportation gave you. 1 second. Korvek opened fire. The rotary carbine was a crew-served weapon that one man had no business operating alone, but Korvek had modified the carry rig over years of use until it was an extension of his body, and he swept it left to right along the insertion point in a continuous controlled burst that turned the front 2 Solari into ruin before they had finished processing where they were. The sound in the narrow corridor was catastrophic, a physical force that hit Vera in the chest and the back of her teeth simultaneously. She was already firing, tracking right to left, putting 3-round bursts into the joints of the calcified armor, neck, elbow, knee, the only places the rounds could do meaningful damage. The map of Solari anatomy she'd memorized so completely it had replaced other memories of what she'd been before this. The 3 surviving Solari oriented. The closest one raised a weapon limb and fired a plasma lance that took a 20-centimeter divot out of the bulkhead 2 inches above Vera's head, and she dropped to her knee and fired upward into the joint where the limb met the body and kept firing until the limb stopped, and then she moved, always move, never present a static target, diving behind a junction box as the second Solari fired where she'd been. Korvek took it in the shoulder. A glancing hit from a plasma arc, the plate on his left shoulder burning through, the flesh beneath it burning too. He didn't stop firing. He never stopped firing. He shortened his arc and poured everything into the second Solari until it went down, and Vera came up from behind the junction box and put the last rounds in her magazine into the third one's neck, and then the corridor was quiet except for the ringing in both their ears and the slow hiss of venting coolant from a pipe the plasma fire had ruptured. 5 Solari dead in under 12 seconds. Vera was reloading before she'd fully straightened up. "Korvek. I'm fine." He said it like a reflex, the way you said it when it was partially true. "Let me see. Let me see." She didn't have time for the whole negotiation, so she just crossed to him and pulled the ruined shoulder plate away and looked. The burn was 3rd degree across a palm-sized area, and it was going to be agony inside an hour when the adrenaline wore off, but the joint was intact and the artery underneath was intact and he could still operate the carbine, which was the operative question. "Dress it later," she said. "Dress it later," he agreed. Radio, Drescher's voice, tight and controlled. 6 Bravo, contact. Approximately 12 Solari, upper approach. Ren's charges are holding the forward line. We're good. Radio, Priest, less controlled. Fire door position, contact. We've got, Tess says more incoming, 7-second read, multiple signals. Then Tess's voice, and even over the radio Vera could hear something different in it, something she'd never heard before in 2 years. "Incoming, all points, command, all points, this is a mass insertion event, I am reading." And then the ship screamed. Not a metaphor. The iron gate itself made a sound, a deep structural groan that propagated through the hull plating into the soles of Vera's feet, as 300 Solari warriors teleported simultaneously throughout every habitable space aboard, 300 discrete displacement events drawing on power reserves that bent the ship's own electromagnetic field, and for a moment every light on the iron gate went out. In the dark, Vera stood completely still and listened. From everywhere, above her, below her, ahead and behind, from the maintenance spaces and the crew quarters and the ship's internal spaces she'd memorized like the rooms of a childhood home, the sounds of the Solari boarding. The crack of displacement. The thunder of heavy bodies against deck plating. The high harmonic shriek of plasma lances firing. The distant, terrible sound of human voices ending suddenly. The emergency lighting came on. Red. The whole ship drenched in red. Radio check, Vera said. Sound off. Korvek, here. Dresh, here. Sable's with me. Ren is, a half-second pause that contained something terrible. Ren's here, she took a fragment from a secondary blast, she's mobile. Priest, here. Tess, a longer pause. Static. Then, Tess, here. I'm sorry, Sergeant. That mass event, the readings compounded, I couldn't distinguish individual signals from the aggregate. Later, Vera said. Everyone fall back to the secondary rally point. Deck 4, the medical bay junction. Move. She and Korvek moved. The iron gate's corridors, already narrow, were now a different architecture, an architecture of threat, every doorway a potential mouth, every intersection a question she had to answer before entering it, every closed door a guess about what was on the other side. She moved the way she'd learned to move, the way she taught each member of her team to move, weight forward, weapon tracking the eyes, never stop analyzing, never let the accumulated violence of the day settle into pattern blindness, never assume that the last 10 seconds of nothing meant the next 10 seconds were safe. They made the junction at Deck 4 from two directions, Vera and Korvek from the fore, Dresh and Sable supporting a walking Ren from the aft, Priest and Tess dropping down from the vertical axis with the controlled speed of people who'd been moving in ships their whole careers. Ren had a fragment wound in her left thigh, through and through, wrapped in field dressing, bleeding controlled. She was white around the eyes but her hands were steady and she had all her detonators and she said, when she saw Vera, "I'm fine, Sergeant," in a voice that Vera believed because she had to. Tess stood a little apart again. The bioluminescence on his neck was agitated, not pulsing warning fast, but faster than baseline, flickering with the residual energy of what he tried to read and failed to distinguish. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Vera went to him. Not because she had time for it, but because it was necessary, because there were things that had to happen regardless of time or she would not have a functioning team in 20 minutes. "Look at me," she said. "He did. You gave us the mass event warning. That warning bought the team 3 seconds. I couldn't differentiate. You gave us the mass event warning," she said again, harder. "That's not nothing. That's never nothing." She held his gaze for 2 seconds. "Reset and work. That's all." He inhaled. The bioluminescence steadied marginally. "Reset and work," he said. "What's your read right now?" He closed his eyes. Opened them. Approximately 40 Solari on this deck. Multiple units converging on the bridge approach. Smaller element, 6, maybe 8, moving through the maintenance spaces toward engineering. "They're going for the drive core," Korvek said. "They always go for the drive core," Sable said. "Disable the drives, the ship can't run. Then they take their time." Vera was already recalculating. The bridge was the obvious target. Capture the command crew, take the ship intact, another caraway. But if they got to the drive core and disabled the jump drives, nothing else would matter. With 300 soldiers aboard, they could take the iron gate at their leisure. "We split," she said, and felt rather than saw the team's response to that. The recognition that splitting a 6-person unit that was already undersized against 300 was a statement about the arithmetic of what they were doing. "Korvek, Dresh, Sable, bridge approach, slow them down. Don't hold the corridor, don't take a stand, hit and fall back, make them pay for distance. You're buying time." "Time for what?" Dresh asked. "For Tess and Ren and me to get to engineering before that Solari element does." She looked at Ren's leg. Looked at Ren's face. Ren met her eyes without blinking. "The jump drives are the ship. If they go, we go. And if the element is already there?" Sable asked. Vera checked her ammunition count. "Then we deal with that." The engineering approach was through a service corridor that ran along the ship's keel. tight enough that the Solari would have to move in single file, which was the first piece of luck they'd had since the event began. The three of them moved fast, Tess on point with his eyes half closed and his attention turned inward toward whatever sense processed the quantum resonance of Solari displacement, Vera in the middle, Ren at the rear with her weight distributed carefully to minimize the draw on her injured leg. Tess stopped. His hand came up. "Two," he breathed. "In the corridor junction ahead. Not teleporting, already placed. They're waiting." "Ambush," Vera said. "They know we're coming." Which meant they'd heard the radio, or they had their own intelligence, or the Solari tactical minds aboard had been 3 moves ahead of her since the event began and she was operating on a lag she didn't know the length of. It didn't change the math. The junction had to be cleared. She thought for 3 seconds. Ren. Charges. Ren was already unclipping a compact-shaped charge from her belt, and Vera watched her measure the corridor geometry with her eyes, the way Ren always did, the slight tilt of the head, the brief stillness, and then Ren handed it to her and said, "Top right corner of the junction, as high as you can place it. It'll channel the blast down the left branch and leave the right branch viable." "You're sure?" "Sergeant," Ren said, with the particular slight exhaustion of a professional whose expertise is being questioned, "yes." Tess placed the charge. They backed to the bend. Ren detonated it. The shaped blast was extraordinary. Vera had worked with demolitions experts her whole career and she had never seen a charge work as cleanly as one of Ren's, the energy directed with a precision that felt closer to surgery than explosion, the left branch of the junction obliterated and the right branch, their path, intact. She was moving before the echo finished, through the smoke, over the rubble, past what remained of the 2 Solari who'd been waiting in the left branch, through the junction and down the right corridor toward engineering's blast door, which was sealed. "Crews locked it from inside," Tess said, reading the panel. "That's a good sign," Vera said. "It means there are crew alive in there to lock it. Can we open it from outside?" Vera pressed her hand to the panel. "Engineering, this is Sergeant Vera, Breach Team 7. Open up." Static. Then a voice she didn't recognize, high with controlled terror. How do we know?" "You don't," Vera said. "But the Solari don't knock." A long pause. Then the blast door opened. The engineering space was large by Iron Gate standards, occupying the aft third of Deck 2, a cathedral of drive machinery and power conduits and the jump drive housing that occupied the center of the space like an altar, surrounded by the scaffolding and access walkways of constant maintenance. 17 crew members had sealed themselves in here, engineers, drive technicians, 2 damage control ratings who'd been caught in the wrong place, and they had improvised barricades from equipment cases, and they were armed with the 3 sidearms the space's emergency locker held, and they had been listening to the sounds of their ship being invaded for 20 minutes and they showed it. The chief engineer was a woman named Orvi, compact and steady, with grease on her hands and the look of someone who had been calculating possibilities for the last 20 minutes and hadn't found a comfortable solution. She met Vera with the economy of someone who didn't have time for preamble. 6 Solari units breached the engineering approach corridor 4 minutes ago. Tess's warning, they heard his mass event call on open comms. "They may have their own intelligence," Vera said. "The drive core. Intact. But they're working through the service access. There's a secondary entry point through the drive maintenance crawlspace on the port side, behind the jump housing. We sealed it when we sealed the main door, but it's rated for equipment access, not combat. It'll hold maybe another," she looked at her watch. 10 minutes. Maybe less, if they have anything that can cut." "They have things that can cut," Ren said. Orvi looked at her. At the leg. At the way she was standing. Made a decision not to say anything. "I need to tell you something. We can initiate an emergency jump from here. We don't need the bridge. Engineering has emergency jump authority in a boarding scenario. It's in the battle doctrine." Vera stared at her. "An emergency jump without navigation coordinates. Takes us somewhere in human space, random vector. We come out inside the safety perimeter. Probably." Orvi's voice was even. "The drive core is at 91% charge from the last transit. If I start the spool cycle now, it takes, in this state, with the strain we're already under, I'd say 11 minutes. And if the Solari reach the core during the spool cycle, they can crash the cycle. They'll know what it is when they see it running. They'll know exactly what we're trying to do." Orvi paused. "Which means if we start it, we have to hold them out of this space for 11 minutes. Vera looked at Tess. His eyes were already closed. "The 6 Solari in the maintenance crawl space," he said. "And," he paused. The bioluminescence spiked. Settled. "More coming. Driven here from other parts of the ship. Something coordinated. They know about the jump attempt, I don't know how, but they're converging. He opened his eyes. 12 more. Maybe 15. Coming from the bridge approach corridor. Which meant Korvek and Dresh and Sable. Vera keyed her radio. Korvek, status. Heavy breathing. Gunfire in the background. Falling back, Sergeant. Bridge is lost, they push through, too many. We're falling back toward engineering. A pause. We might be bringing friends. How many friends? A longer pause. Yes. They came in through the blast door in a controlled run, Korvek first, Dresh behind him with Sable tucked under his arm in a way that told Vera something before she could see what it was, and then she saw. Sable was ambulatory but her left hand was wrong, wrapped in a jacket improvised tourniquet above the wrist. And below the tourniquet was not something Vera was going to look at directly because there was no time and looking would only subtract something from her she needed. Dresh sealed the blast door behind them. She's good, Dresh said, not to Vera but to Sable, in the quiet voice he used for her and only her, and Sable said, I know, and she was steady and present and her scattergun was in her right hand and that was what mattered. Orvi had already started the jump cycle. The jump housing in the center of the space had begun to emit a low subsonic vibration that you felt more than heard, a physical presence in the chest and sinuses, the drive building toward the quantum threshold. On the engineering panel, a countdown, 10:43, 10:42, 10:41. 11 minutes, Vera said to her team. We hold this space for 11 minutes. We have 6 people, Korvek said. We have 6 people and 17 engineering crew who want to go home, Vera said. She looked at Orvi. How many of them can fire a sidearm? In theory. All of them. In practice. I'm not asking for accuracy. I'm asking for noise. She turned to the crew. Any of you trained combat, naval infantry, anything? 2 hands. Better than nothing. Everyone who can't fight gets behind the drive housing, Vera said. Everyone who can, take a position on the walkways. High ground. We have barricades, we have limited ammunition, and we have, she checked, 10 minutes and 30 seconds. She looked at Tess. He was already stationed at the portside wall, where the maintenance crawlspace entry was, a recessed panel in the bulkhead that looked nothing like a door until you knew it was one. His hand was pressed flat to the wall. They're cutting through, he said. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Ren, Vera said. Ren was already there. She examined the panel with the tilted head attention that meant she was doing the thing she did, the spatial thing, the thing that Vera had never found an adequate description for. If I charge this panel correctly, she said, when they breach it, the blast will channel into the crawlspace, not into this space. But I'll lose my medium charges doing it. I have 3 light charges left after that. Do it. While Ren worked, Vera positioned the team. Korvek took the main blast door approach. If anything broke through the sealed door, he was the response. Dresh took the starboard side, the only other access point, a maintenance hatch that was welded shut but that was still a structural weak point and that Tess had flagged as a potential insertion destination for the converging Solari units. Sable went to the high walkway above the jump housing where she had an angle on the entire floor of the space and the right hand she still possessed and the scattergun and the look in her eye that said she had already made the calculation about cost and was at peace with it. Priest went up with Sable. He didn't say anything to her. He just went up. 9:12 on the jump cycle countdown. The portside panel detonated. Ren's work was extraordinary. The shaped charge blew the maintenance crawlspace panel inward, away from the engineering space, and the blast channeled down the crawlspace in exactly the direction she'd said it would, and the sounds that came from the crawlspace in the aftermath were the sounds of heavy things in a confined space encountering physics they had not anticipated. 2 Solari dead, Tess said. The other 4 were injured and moving back. 4 minutes bought. 8:41. The blast door didn't hold. Whatever the Solari used on it, plasma cutting tool, some kind of structural resonance weapon, it failed along the lower seam first, the metal folding inward, and through the gap came the first Solari warrior, moving with the controlled urgency of something that has been held up longer than expected and is adjusting. And Korvek opened fire from the elevated position he'd taken on the secondary walkway and the Solari took 4 rounds in the neck joint before it cleared the fold but it kept moving. It kept moving the way they always kept moving when the damage was below a critical threshold, and it raised a weapon limb and fired into the ceiling above Korvek's position and the walkway section he was on dropped 3 inches and held. Dresh left his position and crossed the floor at a run and hit the Solari at the hips, which was tactically insane and which was also the only thing that worked, because Dresh at full run had enough mass to displace the Solari's balance, and while it was recovering, Korvek found the angle on the neck joint again, and this time the rounds did what rounds did when they found the right place. The Solari went down. Dresh was already back at his position. The blast door failed completely. 3 more came through, and then 5, and then the space became what breach team spaces always became, not a battle with lines and positions and controlled exchanges, but a storm, close and terrible, and operating on the instincts burned into the team through 2 years and 11 events, the accumulated knowledge of where to stand and when to move and how to present the angles that kept you alive for another 4 seconds and then another 4 after that. Vera fought through it the way she'd learned to fight through it, without thought, without calculation, operating below the level of conscious decision in the place where training and repetition and the particular knowledge of her own body in a corridor fight had replaced every previous version of herself. She emptied her PDW into the joint structure of a Solari that was crossing the floor toward the jump housing, and when it dropped she stripped the weapon from its forelimb, a plasma lance, too heavy for her to hold and aim properly but adequate at this range, and she fired it into the next one through the door and the next one through the door and the one after that. 702. From the high walkway, Sable's scattergun was doing the work that scatterguns do at close range, the shots placed with the methodical precision of someone who was saving ammunition and applying it with complete attention and who was going to run out before the fight did and who knew this and was not spending time on the knowing. Priest was below her, working the angles she couldn't cover, and they moved in the unconscious synchrony of people who had practiced until the coordination was structural. 6:15. The starboard maintenance hatch failed. Tess had been right about it. The Solari had been working it from outside with something, and it came through at an angle, the whole hatch section, not just the cover but the framing, wrenched inward, and Dresh had 2 seconds to read that it was failing before it did, and he moved laterally and the hatch took out the equipment cases of the barricade he'd been behind rather than him. For Solari through this new opening, and Dresh with his ram met the first one at the threshold in the brutal geometry of the hydraulic breaching tool repurposed for impact, and the first Solari went back through the opening and into the ones behind it, and Dresh sealed the space with his body and the ram and the sheer architecture of his will. He couldn't hold it forever. Tess. Vera called. Tess was already there. He'd taken a burn, plasma arc along his right forearm, the Solari ancestry in his biology making his pain response different, faster to process but not diminished, and he was moving with Vera's urgency toward Dresh's position, and he pressed his hand to the wall beside the breach and closed his eyes and read what was behind it. 9 more, he said. Waiting in the maintenance passage. They'll come through in coordination. They're going to try to push us off the floor and reach the drive core. 5:30. Ren, Vera said. The last 3 light charges. Ren appeared at her shoulder. She looked at the breach. She looked at the wall. She looked at the geometry of it for the 2 seconds she needed. Give me room. She went to work. 4:55. While Ren worked and Dresh held the breach with everything he had, Vera crossed to the main door again, stepping over Solari dead, and found Korvek. He was seated against the base of the secondary walkway, reloading, the shoulder wound ugly but managed, and when he saw her he didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that wasn't already said, and she sat beside him for 3 seconds and reloaded her sidearm from his ammunition. Her PDW was dry, she dropped the plasma lance when it burned out, and they looked at the door. For more Solari came through it. They killed them. Korvek with the carbine, Vera with the sidearm, the engineering crew from the high positions adding noise and occasionally something more useful, and when the 4 were down Vera looked at the door and there was nothing else coming through it immediately and she thought, they're regrouping. They have enough soldiers to regroup and coordinate. They're going to come through all 3 openings at once and they're going to do it in the next. Tess's voice. Incoming, multiple points, mass entry. 3:41. Ren detonated all 3 charges simultaneously. The engineering space held 3 explosions in the space of 1 second, and the sound and pressure of it was an event that Vera experienced more as a discontinuity than a perception, a gap in the sequence of things, before and after, with the middle missing. In the after, she was on the floor, and the wall of the starboard maintenance passage had come down, and there was rubble where the breach had been, and the rubble was moving, which meant the Solari on the other side of it were not all dead. 2:58. She got up. She found the sidearm. She moved. The engineering space was rubble and smoke and the 23 people who'd been in it were distributed through it in various states, moving or still, fighting or tending, and the jump housing at the center of it pulsed with a subsonic frequency of a drive 178 seconds from threshold, and the countdown on the panel said 2:58 and then 2:57 and then 2:56. Vera did the head count she could do from where she stood. Korvek, reloading, moving. Dresh, bleeding from a gash above his eye, moving. Ren, seated, her leg very bad now, hands on her detonator belt with nothing left on it, looking at the rubble where the breach had been. Priest, coming down from the walkway at a controlled slide, landing hard, coming up with his sidearm toward the rubble. Sable. She looked at the walkway. Sable was still on the walkway. She was against the railing, and Vera understood before she fully processed it, the way you understood certain things in the body before the mind caught up, and she was across the floor and up the walkway stairs in the time it took to stop understanding and start knowing. Sable was alive. She was conscious. She was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who was doing the work of staying, and she had her right hand pressed to her side where the blast from Ren's charges, the secondary fragment, the kind of thing no shaped charge could fully account for, the kind of thing that was always in the geometry somewhere, had found her. "Hey," Vera said. "Hey," Sable said. Her voice was level. She was always level. It was the most Sable thing about her. "How bad?" Sable looked at her hand against her side. Looked at Vera. "You need to be on the floor. Tell me how bad." Sable looked at her again, longer. "Go do your job, Sergeant." Vera held her gaze for 2 seconds. 2 seconds that she would carry forever in the place where she carried things. Then she went back to the railing and looked down at the engineering floor with 209 on the countdown and Solari pushing through the rubble of the starboard passage and Korvek and Dresh and Priest moving to meet them and Tess at the jump housing console with Orvi, the two of them watching the countdown together, and she went down the stairs and into it. 1:30. The last 90 seconds of the defense of the engineering space of the Iron Gate were not something that could be narrated from outside, because there was no outside, there was only the inside of it, the brutal intimacy of 5 soldiers, Ren motionless now, Sable above, fighting in the space between the rubble and the drive housing with everything they had remaining, which was the sidearms and the rotary carbine and Drescher's ram and Priest's blade and Vera's hands when the sidearm ran dry, and the Solari who came through the rubble were reduced in number by Ren's charges and slowed by the rubble itself and disoriented by the smoke and the subsonic frequency of the spooling jump drive, and the fight was personal and close and beyond the point where anything was tactical, just the fundamental question of who was still standing when it ended. 1 o'clock. 0:45. 0:30. Korvek was down. He was breathing, Vera could see him breathing, but the rotary carbine was on the floor and he was on the floor and she couldn't get to him, and she took the carbine from where it lay and she had never fired the thing before and it was too heavy and too awkward and she fired it from the hip and it was sloppy and it was adequate. 0:15. Tess's voice, jump threshold reached. Orvi, now. The jump drive made a sound that was not a sound, a frequency below hearing that hit the reptile parts of the brain that knew before the rest of you did that physics was about to change, and every Solari in the engineering space stopped. They stopped the way they always stopped when a jump was initiating, because even the creatures who moved through space like it was a door, knew that being inside a ship during a jump without preparation was something else entirely. In the half-second of that pause, Vera had one clear thought, good. Orvi initiated the jump. The Iron Gate went somewhere else. Quantum jump was survivable when you were prepared for it. Harnesses, orientation, the physical and psychological bracing that was standard procedure. Without preparation, it was the worst thing you could experience and still wake up from, a 3-second interval of spatial dislocation and sensory inversion and the particular horror of your body's navigation systems disagreeing with everything else, and when it was over the engineering space was a different kind of quiet, the quiet of aftermath, of ended things. The Solari were gone. Not dead. Jump transit ejected anything insufficiently bonded to the ship's quantum field. The Solari had been present in the space, not integrated to it, and the jump had shed them like water sheds beads, depositing them, still alive, in the cold vacuum between systems, in the human space they'd been trying to tear pieces from. Vera lay on the engineering floor and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she sat up. "Status," she said. Her voice was the same voice it had been at the beginning of this, the same controlled level instrument. "Sound off." Korvek. A pause. "On the floor. But here." Dresh. "Here." Another pause. "Sable, Sergeant, Sable needs." Priest. "Here." Ren. Silence. Ren. Silence. She looked at where Ren was, in the position she'd taken when the leg stopped letting her stand, against the base of the jump housing with her empty detonator belt and her hands in her lap. The fragment from the secondary blast had been in the geometry. Ren had known this. Had known it and placed all 3 charges anyway, because the geometry required it, because the math was the math. Vera sat with this knowledge for a moment. Just sat with it, in the red-lit quiet of the saved ship. Then she got up. She got Korvek onto a seat. She helped Dresh reach Sable on the walkway. Sable was alive, barely, and the engineering medical kit was inadequate for what she had, but there were hands pressing and the ship's doctor was alive because of what Sable had done on the high walkway and was already being reached on the emergency channel and was already moving. She looked at Priest, who was standing in the center of the engineering floor with his sidearm at his side, looking at nothing, and she put her hand on his arm briefly and he came back from wherever he'd been. She looked at Tess, who was standing by the jump housing, the bioluminescence along his neck very slow now, slower than baseline, the aftermath pattern she'd learned to read as his version of grief. She went to the emergency locker on the engineering bulkhead. Found what she was looking for, a marker. Black, industrial, used for labeling conduits. She looked at the back of her left hand. There was a number there from the last event, faded but legible. She capped it with the new number. Held her hand out and looked at it. Looked at it for a long time. The engineering space was quiet around her. The ship was somewhere in human space, damaged, listing very slightly to port, every system running on reserve power, but present. Here. The Iron Gate existed. The people in it existed, most of them. The number she was looking at was the number that existed, and it was smaller than the number she'd written after the last event, and that was the simple, terrible arithmetic of the work. She looked at Korvek. He was watching her. He always watched her do this, after every event, watched her write the number, watched her look at it, never said anything about it, never asked her what she felt. Just witnessed. She keyed her radio. Breach 7 to command. She waited for the response tone that said she was connected, that command was there, that the command structure she worked within still existed and was listening. The tone came. Iron Gate is clear. She paused. Looked at the number on her hand. We need replacements. She lowered the radio. Outside the hull, human space. Stars she recognized. A rescue beacon already pinging from the Iron Gate's emergency systems, already being received by fleet vessels who were already turning toward them, already calculating intercept times, already putting together the logistics of what came after, the debriefs and the damage assessments and the equipment inventories and the processing of who was lost and where and how, all the machinery of the aftermath of survival. Inside the hull, Breach Team 7. What remained of it? 5 people, Korvek on his seat with his burned shoulder, Dresh on the walkway with Sable's head in his lap, his hand on the dressing at her side, his eyes on her face with the complete attention of someone who has given over all available processing power to one thing. Priest standing in the middle of the floor with the particular stillness of someone reforming themselves around a new absence. Tess by the jump housing with the bioluminescence doing what it did in the quiet after, that slow dirge pulse she'd first seen after Event 4 and had understood without being told. And Vera. Still looking at the number. She put the marker in her pocket. She looked at her team. She thought about the new person who would come, the replacement, whoever they were, wherever they'd come from, and she thought about what it took to make them part of this, the time and the trust and the specific education of learning each other's patterns until the team was something more than the sum of its people, something that operated in the half-second spaces between decision and action where survival lived. She thought about Ren's hands on her detonator belt, left to right, left to right. She thought about Sable's voice, "Go do your job, Sergeant." She thought about the 11 times she'd stood in a corridor and watched the number on her hand get smaller, and the 12 times she'd stood at a staging point before an event and looked at her team and thought, these people, and meant it as the wholest possible thing she knew how to feel. She put the radio away. She went to work.